Hi guys, and welcome back to another tutorial. This month's tutorial is going to be focusing on how to draw a mermaid. This tutorial is going to be pretty hands-on and practical, unlike some of my other tutorials where I usually do a bit of anatomy first. So instead I'm gonna try and focus on a few practical tips and kind of breaking down what a mermaid is, what does she or he look like, and how to draw the specific parts of her that make her look like a mermaid. So I'm going to break down the tail, the long hair, the fins and the bra. We're gonna have fun exploring how they can be approached and what kind of changes you can make to these elements to make sure that your mermaid is also unique. So if you're ready, let's get into it. Oh, by the way, I am sorry if it looks like the desk is slowly shifting away from the camera. My phone was lighting very slowly in the tripod, so I didn't notice as I was shooting this, but now that I'm editing this, I can actually see it very clearly, so I'm really sorry about that. Never mind, let's get going! Let's start with a very basic sketch for a presentation pose for a normal bipedal human woman. As usual, I always start with just drawing a circle for the head and divide up this circle in two areas, one vertical, one horizontal, so you divide it in four, and that's where you can then place the ears, the mouth, and every other bit of the face that you want to draw. Then you start drawing the rest of the mannequin for the pose. Draw the line of action starting from the neck and going down in the middle of the body, and on top of this structure that bases around the central line of action, you can then draw the arms and the legs and the rest of the body. As usual, when it comes to good silhouettes, it's important to make sure that the shape is readable, and to do this, you can break out some of the limbs from the main shape of the body so that it's more obvious what is the pose or action that the character is doing. So in this case, I am putting the hands on her hips so that the arms sort of like come out and give a better understanding of her shape, and also the legs are, one going forward, one going backwards, so that there is a bit of space between the calves. Although we're not gonna need the calves because this is gonna be turned into a mermaid. So to turn this lady into a mermaid, you just need to continue the line of action as it goes from the center of the body and through the torso, through the pelvis. You just continue it down and use the natural breaking point of the legs, which is the joint at the knees, to introduce some movement in the tail. The tail doesn't really break like the joints of the knees, obviously, because it's not legs, but that's the general area where you can introduce some of the movement, as if that is the node point where you can make that kind of whipping motion that tails and fish do when they move forward. Also, it's very important to use the last part of the tail, the fins, to introduce some grace to the pose, a sense of lightness and elegance, or you can use it to tidy up the force of the movement that has been introduced by the line of action. So it's very important that you use it to basically amp up the acting of the pose. The fins can act in a graceful way, in a flirty way, in a forceful way. They are a great tool to make your mermaid do different things with their whole body, not just with her expression. In this case, this is a presentation pose, so the mermaid is just standing still, and therefore I made the fins just curl up against the tail as if she's just standing and waiting to start moving again. Also, as you can see, one fin is up and one fin is down, which introduces some movement and flow to this pose, even though it's a static pose. Hi, Editing Memo here. I thought this was a good point to remind you that if you like this video, please do smash that like button and subscribe to my channel, as this helps me creating more tutorials like this and gives me the motivation to keep editing my videos, which is absolutely the thing I hate to do the most. Let's try and apply this process of drawing a normal human woman kind of sketch and then turn it into a mermaid using the joint of the knees and the line of action to a slightly more difficult pose. This pose that I'm gonna draw is a very typical pose for a mermaid, which is just basically sitting on a rock or a cliff and luring the sailors and fishermen to their deaths, because everybody knows that mermaids love to do that. At least they used to love to do that in ancient times and classical times. Maybe mermaids nowadays are more peace-loving, I am not sure. But basically a mermaid sitting on a rock is something that everybody has in their mental image of a mermaid, so if you want to draw a mermaid in an easy pose that will look pretty and nice, just draw her sitting, because it's a graceful pose and it allows you to play around with some other elements like the beauty of her hair and the way that the tail will curl around her, so it's a great pose to try out if you're a beginner in drawing mermaids. I'm gonna draw her first with legs, like I did before. It's also probably easier to look for a reference pose for sitting for someone with legs, because humans have legs, obviously. So just go on Pinterest and look up a nice reference picture of a woman sitting in a way that is graceful and that you like, and just approach that drawing as you would draw any other character pose, basically, and then we'll go from there. When you draw the shape of the hair, make sure that you're breaking out some of the locks to add more flow to the hairstyle. You can do so by making some of the hair coming down in front of her shoulders and some of it going behind them. You can break up some locks going in front of her face, in front of her ears, and some instead go behind the ears. Why am I saying this? Well, this is important in any character illustration to add movement to the hair, but specifically with mermaids, this is very nice and very important to do, because one of the main features of a mermaid is that they have a lot of rhythm and flow in their shapes. They are marine creatures, with water and currents always moving the hair around their body, and their tails and fins are also somewhat lighter than bone and flesh, so the fins will also be moving around. They have a lot of membrane always moving around, you know, like any other marine creature, basically. It's very important that you introduce this flow in the shape of a mermaid. The extra flow and flexibility of a mermaid also adds to the feeling for the viewer that they are not wholly human creatures, right? They are magical, so they're gonna have a lot of swirling around. So every aspect of a mermaid, from the body pose to the way the hair and the fins move, should be characterized by a subtle flow. This is why it's easier to draw beautiful mermaids if they have long hair or very long hair. Of course, I'm not saying that short hair on a mermaid doesn't look nice. You know, mermaids with short hair or even no hair can be beautiful. Actually, some of the best drawings of mermaids I've seen sometimes have very short hair because they look so different. But it is more difficult to draw a good mermaid with short hair. If, again, you're a beginner at drawing mermaids, I would suggest that you draw them with long hair or very long hair, because it just adds to a level of movement to the body and to the overall shape of the image. So you can break out some of the locks of the hair and introduce a lot of curved lines that follow the shape of the body. Basically try and alternate curved lines for the hair broken down by straight lines and angles where the locks of hair intertwine with each other, and you can follow the flow of the body, or even use the hair to go in front of the chest of the mermaid so that you cover up her breasts with her hair instead of the shells for the bra if you want to go more natural and old school. That's all good. You can then use the natural breaking point of the legs at the knee to make the tail bend like we did in the first picture. Some artists make this bend very obvious and angular, as if it's really a sort of tail knee, and some other artists prefer to keep it a lot softer, as if it's a tube or basically like spaghetti legs kind of thing. I'm somewhere in the middle, as in I'm still gonna keep the tail kind of rounded and tubular around the knee area, but I'm also gonna make it bend as if they were knees. To introduce more perspective to the drawing, you can make the final part of the tail, where the fins start, to bend against the main part of the tail, going up. So basically you are overlaying this last part of the tail and fin to the main part of the tail. You can do this since the fins are usually semi-transparent, so they will allow you to show the shape of the tail behind them anyway, because you can just turn down the opacity for that layer and therefore keeping the nice silhouette of the whole, slithering tail. But it also introduces some foreshortening and it also looks more natural. Also, this is done to keep the figure more compact, since the tail and fins are actually very long, if you think about it, a lot longer than natural legs for a human being would be. So if you keep them unbent, they would probably occupy a lot of the page and the whole shape and silhouette would look a little bit too spread out, which is okay if you're going for a swimming pose, but if you are going for more like a pretty presentation pose, then it's better to keep the image more compact and the silhouette of the character in the center of the page a little bit smaller. So if you bend the tail up against the main part of the tail, then you can keep the image smaller and the attention of the viewer more focused on the face of the mermaid and the rest of the body rather than the fins. Fins can actually be pretty troublesome to draw, as you probably see here, and I'm having trouble drawing a very thin line because it's curved, and of course, your hand needs to have proper training to be able to do what your eye and your mind's eye command. But aside from the technicalities of actually being able to draw a long curved line, keeping it loose but also maintaining the force of the sign, fins can also be troublesome for other reasons, like, for example, whether you're not sure what kind of shape to give it, where exactly to affix it upon the tail, etc. So the way that I do it is that usually I draw the final part of the tail, the part that gets narrower and narrower, like the end bit of a snake, and then I trace two convergent lines from it in order to make a triangular shape on one side and then on the other one, and that's it. Very basic fins. You can also trace two more lines following the shape of the fin from the corner where the triangle closes to the base of the tail, basically dividing up the fin in 3 sections, which helps to make the fin look more realistic, more materic, and keeping the strength of the 3D shape. Remember that fins are lighter and flimsier than the tail. They are affected by what we call in animation follow-through. Follow-through is basically an action that follows the main movement a second later, like a cape or hair. For example, if I jump with my hair loose, my hair will be affected differently from the rest of my body because it doesn't have muscle or bone. It will basically follow my main movement just a few frames later than the rest of the body. A material will get affected in different ways according to how heavy it is. So for example, if you're wearing a cape or a heavy coat, this coat will move differently from a flimsy scarf, even though both materials will be affected by follow-through. One will be more affected and the other will be less affected because of the weight that they have. So a similar effect will also happen to the fins, although that will depend on the type of fin that you're drawing and how thick the membrane is. But as a rule of thumb, we can all agree that it's gonna be lighter than the main tail. Also remember that the fins are 3D shapes and not flat planes, so as the tail moves around in a 3D environment and it turns around or rotates around itself, the fin needs to follow it and show an appropriate sign of foreshortening in relation to the focus point and the camera. So let's talk about bras now. I'm just going to draw a basic bust shape so that we can explore some of the options for chest coverings that are available to you if you're a mermaid and live under the sea. You're now going to see some cartoon nipples that I'm going to draw, so I'm warning you now just in case you want to stop this video and just not watch it anymore. It's a very tame representation of nipples though. Right, so one option, for example, which I think is quite naturalistic and modern looking, is to keep the scales of the tail going over the belly until they cover up the chest, hinting that the back instead is naked. This concept can be applied to lots of different types of fish and marine mammals, so you can mix the mermaid idea with a specific type of fish. You can have the scales of the tail going over the chest and bust, kind of mimicking the monokinis that have been in fashion for the past few years. So I think this option will make the mermaid look more connected to the animal world, while at the same time quite trendy. Another more traditional option is to use starfish or shellfish or any other type of artificial covering as a bra. This idea was introduced by The Little Mermaid, and it's a very human-centric view on the mermaid world, I think, like as if mermaids are human beings who use items taken from the environment around them as their own tools. I personally dislike this concept since it's basically what humans do to nature in general, just take what you want without worrying if it's sustainable. I mean, what about all the shells that they are using? Are they throwing them away when they're done with them? Where do they leave their trash? I'm not sure. If you want to use this idea, as it is very popular still, please remember to appropriately affix and spread out the material on the chest so that it looks as though it's actually molded and kind of holding up the breasts instead of just being kind of flatly affixed on top of it. The fourth option is to imagine that the bikini is basically just some other part of the scales of the body of the mermaid. Just like it covers the tail, it also covers her breasts. So this idea is the more naturalistic, as if like the biology of the mermaid just means that she has some scales or fluff basically growing on top of the skin around her breast area, and this is personally the option that I chose for this year's mermaid prompts. Of course, the most classical option is simply to have long hair flowing in front of the breasts, which I think is still very classy and fashionable. It could have its downside, as in, as soon as you move, you're basically naked, but I don't think the mermaids would care that much, so I still think it's a viable option. Finally, let's talk about another very important thing to consider when drawing a mermaid, that is the posing. As I was saying before, it's important to add flow and flexibility to every pose that concerns a mermaid, but especially to any dynamic pose, like swimming or twirling around or rotating around herself or doing cartwheels, any of these posing. A great exercise, just like the sack of flour exercises that I showed you in last month's tutorial about drawing the torso, is to trace some random S and C shapes all around the page and then quickly sketch a mermaid around them. So create the whole of the mannequin of the mermaid around the S shape or the C shape, using that shape as the line of action. You can do this exercise very quickly, staying for no more than 30 seconds to 1 minute on each sketch, and if you do this every day with tons of different mermaids, I can assure you that you're going to see a big improvement in your dynamic posing. The hair and the fin can complement the main force of the line of action, sometimes adding grace and elegance to the force of the movement, and sometimes even exaggerating the force of the movement by highlighting it. enjoyed this video, and I'm gonna leave you with 2 sample poses that you can use to create your own mermaids. Even though May is almost over, maybe you still want to try your hand at mermaid, so please do tag me if you end up using these samples. You can find the PSD files down in the description, and yeah, if you want to download them, tag me on social media, I will give you a shout out. Leave a comment if you want to let me know what would you like to see the next tutorial about, and I shall provide. Bye!